Broadcasting from Detroit's Cass Corridor, it's the Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. Today on the show, from D.C. to Detroit, the government shutdown is hitting home.
Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib joins us to talk about the cost of inaction and what hunger reveals about who we are as a nation.
Also, Detroit is planning its next chapter. We'll hear from the Detroit documenters about the city's new master plan and how ordinary residents are helping shape the future.
Later, we'll hear from Red Hot Chili Peppers drummer Chad Smith, who talks growing up in Metro Detroit and how his love for music began right here.
And fine artist and muralist Aijana Cortez brings our special series Container to a close with a celebration of Black Detroit in living color. The stories begin here in Metro Detroit and ripple far beyond. Welcome to the Metro.
We begin in kitchens across Michigan, where hunger is on the table. Now, hunger isn't inevitable. This country has the tools to prevent it. But right now, America is failing. That's because the federal food aid program, SNAP, is paused. More than 1.4 million Michiganders rely on SNAP to buy food. The majority of recipients are children, the elderly, and people with disabilities. But because of the federal government shutdown, November funds are frozen. Late last week, 2 federal judges ordered the Trump administration to use billions in contingency funds to keep the aid flowing. The administration has yet to signal it will comply. Meanwhile, local and state governments have been stepping in. The city of Detroit and the state of Michigan have allocated millions to emergency food assistance. But this isn't just about groceries. Every day of this shutdown, the pain deepens for vulnerable people and federal workers alike. Paychecks, heating assistance, childcare are all on the line. Now, this lands hard in places like Michigan's 12th District, which covers Detroit, Dearborn, Inkster, and Downriver communities. These are areas shaped by working-class families, new immigrants, and people living paycheck to paycheck. Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib represents those communities, and she joins me now. Congresswoman, welcome back.
No, thank you for having me.
So first, what are you hearing from community members right now about what it means to have SNAP suddenly stop?
I mean, I think the folks are moving with urgency and showing up. Kind of reminds me of the pandemic and how everybody kind of came together. And so I talked to many of our superintendents, school superintendents, who are putting plans together of how they can ensure those children who qualify for free lunch program usually are those that benefit from SNAP benefits. Our primary food assistance program in the nation. And even talking to many of our food banks and others, they're bracing themselves. They know what this will mean. This means over the weekend, children are going to go hungry. This means many of our seasoned residents on fixed income, many of which are veterans, disabled, that are, going to struggle. I think folks need to know, the average of what we provide on the federal level is $6 a day. And you talked about the $5 billion contingency. It's an emergency fund, so folks that are listening know what this is. We put $5 billion aside. Congress already appropriated. There's no step needed other than the Trump administration implementing it. This would get us at least a third of the month in to be able to provide so that there's no disruption in food assistance programs while we continue to negotiate a budget. And so it's really, a lot of people are taken aback. They're angry. I had a resident call me and say, wow, he can come up with $40 billion for Argentina, but he won't even spend the $5 billion that, is already there to help us. It's like, why, folks are asking me in a way that it makes my heart hurt of they're begging their own country to care about them. I know folks are going to show up in a way that's beautiful, and I just hate that, we have to go through this process of pushing back against those that continue to other or continue to allow those that are most vulnerable among us, especially our children, suffer.
And again, the courts have ordered the Trump administration to release the emergency funding you're talking about, but the White House hasn't acted yet. And as I mentioned, the state of Michigan, the city of Detroit are putting in their own dollars. Are these stopgap measures enough?
It's going to, I think, help in a major way. I want folks to know that it looks like the Trump administration's not going to appeal that decision by the court. We're going to see in this coming week, but it looks to be that case, and that is a good sign that possibly they might proceed. Now, what happens is we're going to have to go into court. I mean, there's hundreds of cases been filed against the Trump administration. They lost over 96% of them. But we continue to have to get back into courts to enforce the court decision. That's what's going to end up having to happen, especially when we see them again not even trying to appeal the decision.
Looking at Congress, are there any other actions lawmakers could take right now to get basic services moving again, even before a full budget deal is made?
I mean, one of the things that I think many of us are doing is educating folks on the $5 billion. Look, that's there for this moment. It was allocated, again, passed by Congress, and I think it was overwhelmingly supported, where we had this set aside for a moment like this. Folks call it contingency fund. I tell people, no, it's the emergency fund that we have to lean on in moments like this where we are stuck and can't pass a budget. And so it is important to know that we are, pushing. And if you are out there and listening and you're like, well, this money is appropriated, why aren't we using it? Then, pick up the phone and contact your members of Congress and your senators and others. But again, I think it's really important for folks to know that we do have an opportunity to be able to make sure no one's going hungry. And that, again, it's the disruption of services of these programs that really, to me, create not only trauma, but really hurt our families in the long run.
Can you talk a little bit more about the disruption of services and programs, some of the other ways that you think people right now in your district are hurting because of this shutdown?
I mean, most of my residents are living paycheck to paycheck or the reloading of their bridge card. I mean, they have these expectations of what happens every month, especially, it's usually October 30th or November 1st, where, again, they're expecting to go and do the monthly grocery purchase. And all that, again, is disrupted. What do? They have to hustle and figure out where can they go to fill in that gap. A lot of them are frontline workers. I think people don't realize many of my residents are SNAP assistants are also folks with children that are frontline workers that are working in hospitality, construction, number of areas. Again, these are even some of it's crazy to know this, but some people that work in the school system qualify for SNAP benefits because they're not paid enough. I don't think people understand who is impacted fully. You see the 1.4 million in Michigan, but you don't realize behind that is like incredible stories of people that are doing everything right and just need help, especially because groceries are up 28%. Milk, eggs, the basics are, the corporate greed and the price fixing and gouging that is happening in the grocery industry is rampant right now. And so this was just a little bit of support that can help, again, make sure that they don't go hungry.
I mean, Congresswoman, you're talking about some of the deeper systemic problems that lead to poverty and hunger. And I want to think a little bit more about that because national data show that some of the country's biggest employers, Walmart, McDonald's, Amazon, also have large numbers of workers who rely on SNAP benefits to get by. Now, Michigan doesn't release that data, but chances are the trend is quite similar here. What does that tell you about our labor system when people working full-time for either major corporations or school districts still need help buying food? And what, if anything, should Congress be doing about it?
I have a bill, and I keep telling them, look, we are subsidizing for the fact that the CEOs are making now, I think the average is 300 times more than their workers. Just imagine that. In the 70s, I think it was 20 or 30 times. It's almost 300 times. And so I have the Tax Excessive CEO Pay Act. I tell my colleagues, many of which are like, why are people so upset with Democrats? They need you to go after corporations and go after these systems that are keeping people in the cycle of poverty. That's the problem. And so, right now, my bill says, hey, if you're at 50 times more, then you need to be able to be taxed at a higher rate. Because guess what? The federal government is subsidizing your greed, is subsidizing your salary, the stock payouts, and you need to pay your fair share. And again, it's the cycle that continues to happen. It's not just what you see with, starvation wages. That's what I call them. But you see it also in the gouging, around auto insurance is going over 40% increase. It's so much for many of my families that continue to struggle. And if I get into healthcare, the devastating stories I continue to hear of people just not going to a doctor, even though they have cancer. They are like, I can't pay $700, Rashida, for my chemo. I worked all my life, and it just makes me break down every time I talk to them. And I continue to tell people, how are we watching this continue to happen while, so much wealth is at the top? And folks label it a certain way when I say it like that, but it's the truth. We, the federal government, continue to subsidize for folks to stay in the cycle of poverty because we don't push the corporations to pay their fair share, to be taxed at the right rate, especially because many of them are going to get on Medicare, Medicaid, or get on food assistance and a number of other programs I'm not even mentioning. And so I think it's really important to make sure that they are paying into a system that is obviously, again, subsidizing for their greed.
So what you're saying is when a company's workforce depends on public benefits, the public is in effect subsidizing that employer's low wages.
We are. Amazon workers are right now they're not getting paid a fair wage, and now we are right now subsidizing for many of them for food assistance and health care.
What do you think, Congresswoman, is a living wage in Michigan, and how much should people be paid per hour to make ends meet now with these rising costs you're talking about?
Look, I know it's not 15 anymore.
That's right.
That's what I do know. But I think that's something we have to decide. Before we decided that, I think in Michigan that per pupil to really educate and make sure it's equitable access to public education, that I think a study came out, I think it was between $10,000 or $12,000, I can't be exact, per pupil. I think we have to look and see what is the cost of living, what that would equal to making sure people are not just survivor mode and living paycheck to paycheck, but they're thriving. And that's something, again, we should look into. But I know now many would agree $15 an hour is not making it.
I mean, some critics, though, would argue that raising corporate wages, that those kinds of mandates could backfire, leading to automation, to higher prices, or to job cuts. How do you respond to those concerns?
You already see it happening. Corporate greed is not being checked. It's like a disease in our country right now. People actually are dying because of it. I don't think folks realize we have sick care in our country because folks are driven by profit in our healthcare system, not by real health care, and making sure people are doing preventive care and making sure, that they're getting the services they need to have access to their medication. They're not rationing their insulin, all those things. But I think folks need to realize we have a lot of power in the public sector and government and pushing back against that. You see attempts of it in many ways at the local level, making sure people that are getting large tax breaks or getting land for nothing, wanting to move with an effective, legally binding community benefits agreement, not what we have at the city right now. But there is movement at the local level when the federal government's not acting and saying enough is enough. We can't afford rent. We can't afford groceries. We can't do all of the things that I think is really necessary to be able to thrive in our country. And again, I don't think folks realize how traumatic and how much of a cycle that trauma is of being hungry as a child, skipping those meals. No child in our country should have to go through that. And I think we need to push back. It's a combination of everything, making sure the federal government does what it needs to do and reinvesting in our community. But it's also acknowledging the fact that the last, I call it the budget betrayal, the largest shift in wealth in the history of our country, the largest historic cut to food assistance in the history, really making it almost impossible for many of our residents on Medicaid to stay on Medicaid. And so they're already doing it and making it worse. And we're saying, hey, no, if you're going to be in our country and do business in our country, then you're going to have to pay your fair share, and you're going to have to do X, Y, and Z to make sure that people, again, are not struggling as much as they are today.
Congresswoman, what does this say about our values as a country? Or is it that what's happening right now is not reflective of America's values?
The fact that I continue to get attacked for wanting to feed my hungry neighbor. The fact that I keep saying, how come we always come up with money for wars and bombs with a snap of a finger? $40 billion for Argentina, so much funding for genocide. But when it comes to health care in our country, food assistance in our country, we seem to say, where are we going to get the money? I watched over and over again, Democrats and Republicans vote for an inflated Pentagon budget. I think they call it Department of War now. Yeah. The war machine is real, y'all. And what's so sad is many of my colleagues who are members also own stock in war manufacturing, so they benefit personally, which, I have a bill on that. You should not be able to vote on the Pentagon budget, the war machine budget, if you have owned stock in war manufacturing. I mean, the corruption is real, and, I'm not blaming those that continue to feel like they can't trust government because all they see is people on the top making money and people, again, choosing, bombs and wars over feeding hungry children in our country. It chips at your soul. I can't imagine my residents continue again, but I get attacked consistently by saying, why aren't we choosing our people here and investing in our communities here versus continuing to allow the war machine to make so much money for defense contractors and for members of Congress who own stock?
I want to dive deeper into some of the things that you've mentioned here. We do have to go to a break in a moment, though. And before we do that, I do want to ask you, Republicans say Democrats aren't playing ball right now in respect to the government shutdown. And it's their fault SNAP benefits are not funded right now. Democrats insist they won't compromise on health care. Where can a compromise be struck?
I think it's important to know, my Republican colleagues have to say that because they don't have no other option to say, because I've talked to some of them and I said, well, get us back into D.C. Let's talk to each other. I think when we're all in a room, we're on the House floor together, we can start negotiating in good faith. I want to urge the American public right now that I actually get more emails right now about please do not move forward and pass something that doesn't have the extension of the Affordable Care Act. I got more emails on that than I did on the Medicaid cuts. I think because of the sheer number of folks on Affordable Care Act that are already very sick. And the stories are, again, heartbreaking from an 18-year-old daughter of a parent that is on Affordable Care Act. She begged, please don't do this to my dad. I mean, I don't think she's ever emailed a Congress member before. I mean, it was it was just a simple email, like she texted me or something. I could tell, from her phone. But she sent that message, and I won't forget the fact that she continues to say, "Please don't let my dad." My dad is going through cancer. He's disabled. He was a veteran, and this is all he could be able to access is health care through Affordable Care Act. And I think it's important to people to know it's not perfect. It's the Band-Aid, and we can't allow them to rip the Band-Aid off.
If you're just joining us, this is The Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent. I'm talking with Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib about how the government shutdown is affecting families here in Michigan. When we come back, we'll shift gears because even as these issues unfold at home, a major humanitarian crisis continues overseas. Stay with us. WDET. I'm Robin Vincent. I've been talking with Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib about how the government shutdown is affecting families here in Michigan. Now I want to turn to a crisis abroad that affects a lot of people in Metro Detroit. There's been a fragile ceasefire in place in Gaza, but I'm still reading reports daily about Israeli bombardments, and the humanitarian situation remains dire. Human rights groups say that only a fraction of the promised aid is getting through. Large parts of Gaza are in ruins, and families are struggling to find clean water, shelter, and safety. Gaza's health authorities say more than 60,000 Palestinians have been killed since the war began, while Israeli officials report roughly 1,200 deaths from Hamas's October 7th attack. Now, Congresswoman, you've spoken for months about the humanitarian cost of this war, and you've called for a permanent ceasefire. I'm wondering what you're hearing from families in Gaza, and what do you believe the U.S. should be doing now to help protect civilians and ensure aid actually reaches people who need it?
Yeah, just yesterday I talked to husband and wife, and the husband was very teary-eyed, and I knew as soon as he said, I'm from Gaza, that he was going to ask me to help get his sister. It was a family member, and I said, well, who is it? And it was his sister's. He's like, please help me. There's nothing left for them there. There's no place for their kids to go to school. Every day that we send any support, they're having to pay so much more money for food because the Israeli government has this almost like middle management. And so anything goes through there, the cost is even higher. So those that are even poorer or may not have family in the United States are probably struggling a lot more. The crisis is something that we all, the United States played a huge role in. We're the primary financiers of this genocide. And I think what's important to folks listening, the majority of Americans want this to end. The majority of Americans who do not share my faith nor my ethnicity are calling for an end to the genocide. I think what's really hard is some of my colleagues who continue to call out the humanitarian crisis and wanting aid, they call it, aid to come in, but are the same people that continue to send bombs and weapons. You can't do both. You have to use the leverage and saying, look, we're not going to continue to finance, continue to send a transfer of weapons to the government of Israel while they're using forced starvation, using food as a weapon of war, which is a war crime. And so either enforce the current international laws and prohibiting war crimes. Forced starvation is a war crime. I just feel like many of my colleagues will sign letters, express concern, but at the end, if they continue to send the bombs and the weapons, then the suffering will continue to happen, the starvation will continue to happen.
So in your eyes, there's a great deal of incongruency, and this is from both parties.
Absolutely. There's an inconsistency. I mean, look, genocide is bipartisan. I've seen it for 2 years. Overwhelming support to continue the status quo. But it's really hard for me to watch many of my colleagues express so much concern. We need to get baby formula. I mean, Israeli government is not letting peanut butter in because I think if people start hearing the real stories on the ground, I wish that the UN can get in there and the journalists and media can access it. They can see exactly what Palestinians have been telling us. It has been happening on the ground. And unfortunately, again, many of my colleagues who are saying, that they're really upset to see starving children. They're upset to see the continuation of the violations of the so-called ceasefire. I urge them all the time, but you're helping continue it by continuing to fund the genocide, by allowing the weapons transfer to happen, by continuing to allow the funding to happen. Again, that's the leverage that we have. If we truly want to end the forced starvation and the war crimes being committed, then we can stop the funding.
Do you see a world in which that could happen, and what do you think it would take?
Look, the arms embargo is very widely supported among all political parties outside of Congress. I grew up in Detroit, and I always tell people it's the most beautiful, blackest city in the country, but it has taught me overwhelmingly every time I am disheartened. The city has taught me, the community mothers have taught me that transformative change always happens from the outside in. Too many Americans now know exactly what's happening, and they're showing up to their town halls and they're pushing their members of Congress. You see many of them saying, I'm not going to take any money from pro-genocide groups. You see them doing all of that. At the end, I think some of them are still going to walk on that floor and still fund, but their residents, their constituency, Republican and Democrat, are watching those votes now very carefully. So I think there's movement. It's just not as fast as I want it to happen, and I think many of us want it to happen because we want to end the suffering now and end the killings now. But right now, I think overwhelmingly both sides of the aisle know that things are changing, and they're now being urged to stop continuing the humanitarian crisis, but they're being asked to support an arms embargo. They're being asked to support, bills like Block the Bombs Act. They're being asked to do more. But I still remember a colleague in Wisconsin telling me, a farmer got up in town hall and he thought he was going to ask him something about farming, and he didn't. He said, why are we supporting that? Why are we still supporting what is happening in Gaza? And so more and more of my colleagues are seeing, again, this overwhelming wave of folks, again, that do not share my faith or ethnicity speaking up and saying, end it now. So there's going to be a move, I think, but it's going to take a while.
Of course, you have Jewish folks in your district who disagree with these sentiments. What are your conversations like with them? Have you convinced them of what you've been saying to us right now?
Many of them that want to engage me have. Especially in my 12th congressional district. Now, there are folks that from outside of the district that come in that don't know anything about me, have not engaged me. But early on, before the genocide, I engaged a number of my Jewish neighbors, ones that didn't know who I was other than what they saw on national media. And, I have a really loving relationship with many of my Jewish neighbors, especially in Southfield. And what I can tell you is we may not agree 100%. But they know that that isn't Judaism. And they always want to tell me that. And I said, don't worry, I'm Muslim. And I know that, when you see these awful, attacks and people using my faith and weaponizing my faith, I'm like the last person you have to convince. And I know that, many of them are approaching me, not seeing me as somebody that wants, somehow see them as less than human and less deserving of life. But I think we're at a point where we know we both of our communities are the ones going to lose the most if we don't resolve this very quickly.
So what you're saying, though, is that there is the potential for some bridge building when it comes to looking at the weaponization of anti-Semitism and the weaponization of Islamophobia.
Yeah, I mean, again, my Jewish neighbors that have talked to me wanted me to know that this is not something they support and this is not Judaism. And I said, I know. I would never think that. I know this is about, the Likud party and the extremism now in the government of Israel who literally support ethnic cleansing and have for years as part of their policy. And the government of Israel knows, based on what they're passing in the Knesset and other media outlets and the way they deliver, many of them are not very much hiding it. They're saying, kill them all. That's their policy. And I think it's not bridge building as much as there's a connection and they're coming. I feel bad because they're coming to me and saying, hey, that's not all of us. And I said, of course I know that. And I think they know that Palestinians don't want a whole faith to go away. I love sharing the stories of my grandfather picking olives next to his Jewish neighbor. It's beautiful in Palestine. At the time, I think my grandfather told me stories of like Friday was call of prayer, Saturday was Sabbath, Sunday was church bells. We all coexisted together. It wasn't like, one faith had more rights than the other.
Yeah, you're painting a picture that I think a lot of people want to see in the future, a picture of the past that hopefully can be repainted.
Yeah. I mean, my grandparents told me it wasn't always like this, and God rest their soul. They passed on. But I loved hearing that. It's kind of similar, and it's crazy, but it's similar to sometimes when my Detroit seasoned residents tell me, well, this is what the neighborhood looked like before. And this is how it was. We had the traveling swimming pool that came to our park, or the bookmobile, and we all, it's somewhat similar in those experiences when you hear from our elders who said, no, we've been here, we know this is how it used to be. And unfortunately, when extremism comes into play and those that can want to use racist tropes against a whole people, it's really unfortunate, but it's many of our vulnerable communities that get targeted. So.
Of course, the war in Gaza has been reshaping politics here in the U.S. It has me thinking about New York mayoral candidate Zohran Mamdani, who many New Yorkers are likely going to the polls to vote for tomorrow. He's a Democratic Socialist and son of Ugandan and Indian immigrants, and he's been one of the most outspoken politicians on Gaza. He's also centering affordability, rent relief, and public services in his campaign for mayor. You and Mamdani are both Democratic Socialists. Now, New York City is very different from Southeast Michigan. There are more people living more closely together in New York City, of course. But how are the politics in New York City different from those here. And how do you think perhaps what Zohran is doing can translate here more?
No, I don't think you have to be a Democratic Socialist to be inspired by Zohran Mamdani's campaign and what he's been able to do. I love that people are talking, of course, about who he is, his ethnicity. And we had talked about this, and I told him it's going to, of course, we're proud that we're Muslim, but the people are obsessed with it. They can't get beyond that. But I told him, I love that you're helping people fall in love with New York again. I just love that. I told him, I used to go there. I'm like, but now I'm like, oh, that's so cool. And like writing down places he thinks I should go eat at, but it's something incredible to watch a young man who absolutely loves his community so much, but is unapologetic about being Muslim, about his lived experience, about standing up against, genocide. And I think he understands the connectivity of it, the fact that, we have to always speak truth and against things that are unjust. And it builds trust among, many of the residents and the people he's going to represent, that, he's going to be unbought and unapologetic and just completely straightforward about why he believes in what he believes. But I think it is reflective in the majority of his constituents. I really do believe that. I don't think he would be successful and continue to thrive right now in his campaign. I mean, he's on fire right now. I texted, I said, "You're Arabic." He did.
I heard.
Did you see that? And I'm like, oh my God, it's better than mine. And I told him, now I have to do my stuff in Arabic. But people that know I'm Palestinian know I speak with I'm a fallaha. Like Fallahi Arabic is so different. And so it's kind of like a twang. So it's kind of like talking American from like Tennessee or Alabama with a little twang to it. And so I was like, oh my God, Zohran, now I got to go out there and speak Fallahi Arabic. And I know people are going to get a kick out of it, but it's also still like, I still get traumatized because a lot of my Lebanese friends were like, what was that?
I forget the Arab comedian, his name escapes me right now, who responded to Mamdani on Instagram and said, "Ya Habibi, you're speaking better Arabi than 99% of the Arabs I know."
It was incredible pronunciation. I don't think people realize how, I'm sure he got help, and I saw some people behind the scenes helping him, but bravo. I mean, you feel so seen. Yeah. I don't even live in New York, and I'm like, I feel seen right now.
Mamdani has said the immigrant story is a unifying one, that people shouldn't have to translate their lives to be understood in politics. Let's listen.
And I want to take a moment here. I just want to ask everyone in this crowd, if you can raise your hand if you have been called a terrorist while living in this city. If you can raise your hand if you have had to deal with your name being mangled every day that you go into work. If you have ever been made to feel less than because of who you are, because of where you came from, because of what you believe in. This is why these words offend me, because they are about all of us. We are not just saying goodbye to a disgraced former governor on Tuesday. We are saying goodbye to the politics of that disgrace.
Zohran Mamdani in New York City, rousing the crowd there. Do you see that kind of unity in your district where so many languages, faiths, and histories live side by side? And what does it take, Congresswoman, to turn that diversity into real shared power?
I mean, it's that human contact and human connection. Pastor Bland Jr., amazing African-American pastor in my community. I remember being in his pew, coming in. Of course, I stood out, and I was visiting his church, and he looked right at me, and I felt he was talking to me only. And he said, "Our country is not divided. We're just disconnected." And I have remembered that in the last, few years serving in Congress and having such a diverse community. I went from having Southwest Detroit with 20 different ethnicities to now having Dearborn and Southfield and even my Western Wayne communities. And in Detroit, I have a huge, beautiful African immigrant community. And, I'm always reminded of how I can connect many of the movements and people speaking up and literally having like these organizations that may not have thought. And I'm like, well, I need you to, I have a huge Ghanaian community. Can you help me with Know Your Rights there? And even though they're primarily focused in the Latino community, I've been able to connect the understanding that we're all in this together. But, it can be very difficult. I always tell my team, the hardest part of our job is outworking the hate. And that means getting out there and pushing folks to connect with each other in a very human way. And when I ask people like, yeah, I would sit down with that person, or yeah, I would go out and serve that community. And so we just got to continue to do that. But what I love about Zohran, you saw him. He didn't have to bring that up, but he does. Yeah. He puts up the mirror and he says, that's wrong. We haven't had anyone really do that in a long time.
Mamdani has faced verbal assaults and attacks based on his faith and his opposition to the Gaza war. And this is, again, something you've experienced firsthand that you've mentioned in your district, which includes Dearborn. Memories of a post 9/11 America where Islamophobia really took hold. Those are still quite vivid. On Friday, the FBI raided 2 homes in Dearborn. FBI Director Kash Patel said a potential terror plot was thwarted. No charges have been filed yet. Lawyers for 2 men still in custody deny that accusation. We're still waiting to see what, if any, evidence was behind the arrests. Knowing the community as well as you do, Congresswoman, are you concerned about the safety of your constituents from potential terror attacks or subjects of surveillance and targeting by the Trump administration?
Yeah, I'm urging the public to restrain yourselves, because we've seen this before. I've seen my own family being targeted after 9/11, and they get it wrong. And they move differently when it comes to Arab Americans, Muslims, people of different faith backgrounds. But I overwhelmingly see it with communities of color. The fact of the matter is, we have attorneys and others coming forward and saying, no charges have been made. And they haven't actually put any charges on the young men. But again, I think it is really important that we dispute and push back against the bigotry that I think sometimes the FBI statements have been coming out in the national leadership is making a lot of very strong claims without a thorough investigation. I think the process needs to be followed, and people's rights need to be respected. We can't ruin these young men's lives like this. I've seen this before, where just the mere interview, mere knock on that door, changes that family's life forever. They deserve, no matter what, and we all deserve to be safe, but we also deserve to make sure that the Trump administration is not using this for some fear-mongering, hateful division. And, again, no matter what, I think it's important to wait and see. And I think you already see people very suspicious, the way they went about it, the statements. There's already been folks within the agency coming out, leaking out information that said this is not what it looks like.
Finally, Congresswoman, in the last minute we have here, you've lived through shutdowns, censure votes, and constant threats. What's it really like to do this job right now when the government is half closed and people are looking to you for both empathy and action?
So I'm talking to so many people. So we did a listening session with our federal workers. We're staying in very close contact with them. I just got one of the federal workers calling me now. We are trying our best to make sure. It's almost like I explain to people, it's like, with no disrespect of how hard it is to work in an emergency department, I feel like I'm triaging. Our team is always triaging. So when we get that call, when we can't get, now we have these auto replies from the IRS and all these agencies saying, sorry, but during the shutdown, we can't help you. And I don't know if it's just for Democratic offices or not, but shameful on those that can't seem to look up whether or not a grant is going through or whether or not my constituent is going to get that IRS tax refund. But we're triaging in a way that I think is actually leading to some results. I'm a social worker at heart, and getting people through everyday challenges and issues is the heart of our office. We run really strong constituent services programs. So we're working with the state, the city, We already reached out to all the major superintendents in my district, asking them, especially those with larger free lunch recipients. And so we're doing as much as we can and talking to our local government that, again, might be waiting for that funding for the fire department and seeing what we can do to make sure that we can get through this together.
Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
This is The Metro on WDET. Up next, Detroit has changed a lot in 16 years. Has its vision for the next 16 years changed? We'll see what the plan is. That's next here on The Metro. Stay with us.